You ever have one of those moments where something just feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on why? That was me last Friday night. I had just finished a late dinner with some old co-workers at this new rooftop restaurant downtown. Great food, overpriced drinks, decent company, nothing out of the ordinary. I left around 11:45 p.m. and walked back to my car in the underground parking lot. At least, I thought I was walking back to it. But that damn place felt like it had a mind of its own. The thing is, I know I parked on level B3. I remember taking the ramp down past B2 and seeing the big faded B3 painted on the concrete wall. I even took a picture of the pillar where I parked pillar 17 because I always forget where I leave my car. So when I got into the elevator, I pressed B3 without thinking and waited as it rattled its way down. But when the doors opened, the lights were dimmer than I remembered. Like, way dimmer. One of them was flickering like it was trying to give someone a seizure, and everything just looked grimier. I stepped out and immediately noticed that all the cars looked older, dirtier. Not a single one looked remotely modern. I figured maybe I'd hit the wrong level somehow, even though I was pretty damn sure I pressed B3. I turned around to get back in the elevator, but the doors had already shut. I pressed the button again and waited. Nothing. No ding, no whirring, no lights. I jabbed it a few more times and even kicked it, but the elevator was dead. Great. I sighed and pulled out my phone to call someone, maybe even an Uber if I had to. That's when I realised I had no signal. Not even one bar. It was like I'd stepped into a dead zone. Okay, no big deal, I thought. I'll just take the stairs up a floor and try again. I walked to the stairwell at the far end of the lot, past rows and rows of those dusty, abandoned-looking cars. My footsteps echoed with this weird sharpness, like the sound had nowhere to go. When I pushed open the stairwell door, it let out a groan so loud I winced. The stairs were pitch black except for the faint emergency lighting near the exit signs. I climbed slowly, hand on the railing, feeling more and more uneasy. When I reached the next level and stepped out, I expected to see B2. Instead, I saw a massive B6 painted on the wall. I stopped in my tracks. That made no sense. I only went up one flight of stairs. I turned back toward the door I just came through, but it had no handle on this side, just a blank metal surface. I stood there for a second, trying to catch my breath and wrap my head around what was going on. My heart started picking up speed and my palms were sweaty for no reason. Something was very wrong. I tried walking around the level, looking for another stairwell or elevator. As I passed by the cars, I noticed that a lot of them looked damaged. One had its windshield completely smashed in, another had a door hanging off its hinges. The weird part? They were covered in dust, like they'd been sitting there untouched for years, but there were fresh tyre marks on the floor, fresh bloody footprints, leading away from one of the cars. That's when I stopped walking. I told myself it was probably a prank, some weird urban art installation maybe, or I'd had one too many drinks and was overreacting. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The air was heavy, like it didn't want me breathing it. My ears were ringing faintly, and it felt like the entire level was holding its breath, just waiting for me to move again. I turned a corner and finally saw another elevator. I rushed to it like a lifeline. The doors opened before I even pressed the button. Like it knew I was coming, I stepped in cautiously, staring at the control panel. Only two buttons worked, B6 and B6. That's it. Both were lit up. I jabbed at them anyway, hoping maybe it was just a glitch. The doors shut and nothing happened. No movement, no sound. I was trapped in a metal box with no escape. I started banging on the walls, shouting for help. I knew it was pointless, but I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. After a few minutes, the lights inside the elevator flickered and went out completely. For a few seconds, there was only darkness, and then I heard whispering. Not one voice, but dozens, all around me, soft like they were inside my head. I covered my ears and shut my eyes, trying to block it out. When the lights came back on, the elevator was gone. I was standing in an empty hallway with no doors. I wish I could tell you I'm exaggerating, that this was some dream or hallucination, but I felt the cold concrete under my shoes. I smelled the mildew and rust. I heard the soft humming of overhead lights that didn't seem to be coming from anywhere. I walked forward, hoping for an exit, a door, anything, but the hallway just kept going, and the more I walked, the more the walls started to change. At first they looked cracked and stained, then they started to look fleshy, like veins were running beneath the surface, like the building was alive. I picked up the pace, trying to get out of whatever nightmare I had stepped into, but no matter how far I walked, it never ended, until I heard it, the sound of a car engine starting behind me. I turned around and there it was, my car, headlights on, engine running, sitting right there in the middle of the hallway. Except the hallway was gone now. I was back in the parking lot. I blinked and took a cautious step toward the car. The windows were fogged up, and I couldn't see who, if anyone, was inside. I slowly approached, hands trembling, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, but I had no idea where I'd even go, so I reached for the door handle. Before I could grab it, the driver's side window slowly rolled down, and inside was me. Not a reflection, not a hallucination, a perfect copy of me sitting in the driver's seat smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was wrong, wide and stiff, like it had been forced onto his face. His eyes didn't blink. They just stared right into mine, hollow and unblinking. I backed away, stumbling, my mind scrambling for logic. Clone? Doppelganger? I don't know. All I know is it opened the door, stepped out, and started walking toward me. And the worst part, it moved exactly how I moved. When I took a step back, so did it. When I turned to run, it mirrored me perfectly. I was being chased by myself. I ran through the rows between the cars, weaving and ducking, but I could feel it right behind me, every step of the way. I glanced over my shoulder, and it was grinning wider now, eyes completely black. No whites, just two pits of darkness where human eyes should be. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the air around me, like even sound didn't want to exist here anymore. Then, just when I thought I was done for, I saw the elevator again. This time the button worked. It dinged. The doors slid open, and I dove in, jamming the ground floor button like my life depended on it. The thing outside slammed into the doors just as they were closing, but they shut tight. The elevator shuddered violently and dropped. I thought it was going to crash, but somehow it held together. When the doors finally opened, I was in the lobby. Bright lights, security desk, people walking by, just like normal. I stumbled out, panting, covered in sweat, and made a beeline for the exit. I didn't stop to ask questions, didn't talk to anyone. I just ran outside and didn't look back. I never went back for my car, reported it stolen a week later, told the cops I forgot where I parked it. It was easier than explaining what actually happened. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But every now and then, usually at night, I swear I see someone that looks just like me across the street, staring, smiling, and I know I never left that parking lot. Not really. I should have known something was off the moment I stepped out of the mall. The fluorescent lights inside had been giving me a headache for the past hour, and I was more than ready to get back to my car and drive home. It was one of those massive shopping centres with multiple anchor stores, the kind where you could easily spend half your day just walking from one end to the other. I'd parked somewhere in the middle section, or at least I thought I had, near what I was pretty sure was a JCPenney. The thing is, when you're dealing with a parking lot that stretches for what feels like miles in every direction, near the JCPenney isn't exactly GPS coordinates. I stood there for a moment, fishing my keys out of my pocket, trying to remember which row I'd walked down a few hours earlier. The sun was starting to set, casting these long weird shadows between the cars, and I figured I'd just hit the panic button on my key fob and listen for my car's horn. That's when I realised I couldn't remember what my car looked like anymore. I mean, I knew it was a Honda Civic, silver, probably around 2018 or so. But standing there in the parking lot, surrounded by what seemed like hundreds of silver sedans, I suddenly felt like I was looking at a sea of identical vehicles. I pressed the panic button anyway, walking slowly down the row I thought was mine, listening for that familiar beep, beep, beep of my car's alarm. Nothing. I tried the next row over, then the one after that. Still nothing. The parking lot was huge, bigger than I remembered it being when I'd arrived that afternoon. Had it always stretched this far toward the highway? I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow there were more rows now, more cars, more empty spaces, stretching out in all directions like some kind of automotive purgatory. After about 20 minutes of wandering around pressing my panic button, I started to get genuinely worried. The sun was almost completely gone now, and the parking lot lights were flickering on one by one, casting these harsh yellow circles of light that somehow made the shadows between them seem even darker. I'd covered what felt like half the parking lot, walking up and down rows methodically, but my car was nowhere to be found. Worse than that, I was starting to lose track of which sections I'd already checked. Everything looked the same under those sodium lights. Endless rows of cars, mostly empty now that the mall was closing. I pulled out my phone to call someone, maybe my brother, who could come pick me up, but I had no signal. Not even one bar. That was weird because I'd been texting people from inside the mall just fine earlier. I decided to head back toward the mall entrance to get my bearings, maybe ask security for help or use a landline to call for backup. But when I turned around, I couldn't figure out which direction the mall was anymore. I could see lights in the distance, but they seemed to be coming from multiple directions, and none of them looked like the warm glow of a shopping centre. Everything looked like parking lot, just rows and rows of cars stretching out toward dim lights that could have been anything. Street lamps, other businesses, maybe even other malls for all I knew. I picked a direction that felt right and started walking, but after 10 minutes, I still hadn't reached anything that looked like a building. Just more parking lot, more cars, more of those yellow lights creating little islands of visibility in an ocean of darkness. That's when I started noticing that some of the cars weren't quite right. At first, I thought it was just the weird lighting playing tricks on my eyes, but the more I looked, the more certain I became that something was off. There was a red Toyota that looked normal enough, except when I got closer, I could see that all 4 tyres were completely flat. Not just low on air, but completely deflated, and the car was sitting on its rims. But there was no broken glass around it, no signs that someone had slashed the tyres. It just looked like the car had been sitting there for years, slowly sinking into the asphalt. A few rows over, I found a blue SUV with all its windows down, which wouldn't have been weird except it was clearly an older model, maybe from the 80s, and it was absolutely spotless inside. No dust, no wear on the seats, like it had just rolled off the showroom floor decades ago and been sitting here ever since. I kept walking, and the cars kept getting weirder. There was a pickup truck that seemed to be the right size and shape, but when I got close enough to really look at it, I realised it didn't have any door handles. Just smooth metal where the handles should have been, like someone had designed a car that was never meant to be opened. Another car, a sedan that looked perfectly normal from a distance, turned out to have windows that were completely black. Not tinted, but actually black, like someone had painted over them from the inside. I tried to peer through the windshield, but it was like looking into a void. For some reason, that car gave me the creeps more than all the others combined, and I hurried past it as quickly as I could. The parking lot seemed to be getting bigger as I walked. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I swear that's what was happening. Every time I thought I was getting close to an edge, to a street, or another building, or even just the end of the asphalt, I'd find another section of parking lot stretching out beyond it. More rows, more spaces, more cars that didn't quite look like they belonged in the same decade. let alone the same parking lot. I started jogging, then running, trying to find some kind of boundary, some indication that this place had limits. But every direction I went just led to more of the same. Endless parking spaces under those sickly yellow lights, filled with cars that looked normal until you got close enough to see what was wrong with them. I don't know how long I ran before I had to stop and catch my breath. When I looked around, I realised I was in a section of the parking lot that was almost completely empty. Just a few cars scattered here and there, and they were all old. Not classic old, but abandoned old. Rust-covered, windows broken, weeds growing up through the wheel wells. And they were all facing the wrong direction, parked at weird angles, like someone had just dropped them there without bothering to align them with the painted lines. The painted lines themselves were almost completely faded here, barely visible under the dim light. It felt like I'd stumbled into some forgotten corner of the parking lot, a place where cars went to die. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not my own. I was standing perfectly still, trying to figure out which direction to go next. These were slow, deliberate footsteps, the kind you hear when someone's trying not to be heard, but can't quite manage to be silent. They seemed to be coming from somewhere behind me, back in the direction I'd just come from. I turned around, but I couldn't see anyone. Just more cars, more shadows, more pools of yellow light that somehow managed to make everything darker instead of brighter. The footsteps stopped when I turned around, but I could feel someone watching me. You know that feeling, when the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you just know someone's there, even if you can't see them? That's what this was, except amplified by about 1,000%. I started walking again, faster this time, and the footsteps started up again too, always staying just far enough behind me that I couldn't see who it was, always stopping when I stopped. I tried doubling back, taking sudden turns between rows of cars, but whoever it was seemed to anticipate my moves. The worst part was that the footsteps didn't sound quite right. They had this weird echo to them, like they were coming from somewhere much larger and emptier than a parking lot. And sometimes, when I really concentrated on listening, it sounded like there were more than one set of feet following me. 2, maybe 3 sets of footsteps, all trying to match my pace, all staying just out of sight in the shadows between the cars. I was getting desperate now, so I tried a different approach. Instead of trying to get away from whoever was following me, I stopped next to a car and ducked down, hiding behind it and waiting to see who or what would come walking by. I crouched there for what felt like forever, listening to those slow, deliberate footsteps getting closer and closer. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure whoever it was would hear it and know exactly where I was hiding. The footsteps got closer and closer until they should have been right next to me. Then they stopped. Complete silence. I waited another few minutes, then slowly raised my head to peek over the hood of the car I was hiding behind. There was nobody there, just empty parking lot, stretching out in all directions, same as before. But now I could smell something weird, something that definitely hadn't been there earlier. It was sweet and sour at the same time, like fruit that had been left out in the sun too long, or flowers that were starting to rot. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I stood up, looking around for the source, and that's when I noticed that some of the cars around me had changed. Cars that I was sure had been blue or red or white when I'd run past them earlier were now all the same colour, a kind of faded grey-green, like old metal that had been sitting underwater for too long. I ran. I don't know what else to do at that point, except run as fast and as far as I could, hoping that eventually I'd find some way out of this impossible parking lot. But no matter how far I went, no matter which direction I chose, it was always the same. More cars, more yellow lights, more shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And always, always, the sound of footsteps following me, staying just far enough behind that I could never quite catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever was making them. parking lot had become my entire world, and I was starting to suspect that it always had been. That everything else, the mall, my apartment, my job, my life, had just been a dream I'd been having, while wandering these endless rows of cars that didn't quite belong to the world I remembered. The worst part is I'm still here, still walking, still searching, still hearing those footsteps behind me in the dark. And I'm starting to think that maybe I'm not the only one who got lost in here. That maybe some of those cars with their weird modifications and impossible features belong to other people who thought they were just running a quick errand at the mall. Maybe that's what happens when you can't find your way out. Eventually, you become part of the parking lot yourself. Just another car sitting empty under those yellow lights, waiting for the next person to get lost and join the collection. But I'm not ready to give up yet. I'm still looking for my silver Honda Civic, still pressing that panic button every few minutes, still hoping to hear that familiar beep, beep, beep that will guide me home.